Right. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. We cover a wide range of topics. Today, I'm delighted to have Mike back. And Mike, before I introduce you, introduce the topic, the format is Mike is going to make a presentation, then we're going to do breakout rooms, then we are going to do questions. We're going to do lightning round of questions. You bring all the questions that you have, and then I'll organize all of them, and then we'll go one by one, and everybody gets to answer every question. Okay, it's amazing. So with that, let me hand it over to Mike. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you, Shrikant, and thank you all very much for coming out. As I had mentioned in the introduction, if you saw the meetup page, I can't remember for how long, but I've always had a real interest in how people acquire skill. There's a lot of talented people here tonight, and there are more coming. And if I ever caught you at a party or cornered you somewhere, and I find out that you do something at a certain level that is just deeper than the superficial, I'm going to chew your ear off. And I'm just going to keep talking to you until you give me what it is, or kind of a little bit of a path of how you got to where you are. So this being Comprehensivist Wednesdays, we're polymaths here, we're comprehensivists. And one thing I learned very early here at 52 Living Ideas, that polymathy is not Leonardo da Vinci. It is not that at all. It is a spectrum that if you have multiple interests that have just a little bit of depth in all of them, you're a polymath. You don't need to be really, really super good at something or many things. But what interests me, and really the focus of tonight, is this idea of depth. So I'm looking at it like a body of water. So think of it that way. We're a large lake, and there are buoys just floating around. And each one of those buoys are simply a discipline. So you have the mathematics buoy floating here. And then you look down to the right, you need to swim a little bit, and you're in philosophy. And then you might be into some of the hard sciences. You may get into sports. You may get someone who's getting really good at a sport. Now, those buoys represent the different disciplines, but they are floating above the surface. What really interests me is I want to find out, one, how many buoys are in this room tonight? So I'm just speaking directly. The topic is very broad, but tonight the audience is pinpoint. It's just all of you. So I not only want to find out what your buoys are, where are you floating, where are your multiple interests, but also how deep have you gone? So the last meetup we had here last month, we did one on the fear of success, which to me is an impediment to depth. Because if you start getting good at something and you get that awful R word, reputation, you're working at something, and all of a sudden you have a group of friends who know that you're getting good at something, then sometimes the deeper you go, you start feeling a little bit exposed, and you tend to come back to the surface where the buoy is floating. Another one that we did, this was in September, was something called thought and action fragmentation, which is the effect technology has on us, on our ability to keep our actions and our thoughts focused. Because if they're not, you're not going to achieve depth. So those two things are really impediments to getting depth. I want to do the opposite tonight. I want to talk about what has created depth in this particular audience. I'll share a little bit about my own life where I've managed to find depth. I'm going to share a little bit from a book called The Talent Code, which I mentioned in the introduction. I've recently read the book Range and So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. I read them back to back, which are wonderful comparisons to this whole concept of breadth and depth. And it seems here at 52 Living Ideas, we have like these dueling banjos that go along with all these disciplines. In the Tao Te Ching, we have yin and yang. We have the duality of control, order and chaos. And now tonight, we're discussing depth and breadth. Okay, so let me start with the talent code. So this is written by a guy named Daniel Coyle. And what Coyle did is he ended up going around the world and he found these pockets of excellence all over the place. And the one that stood out for me the most was he kind of had this question of why the Brazilians got really, really good at soccer. So he did some investigation, and it turns out, I think it was in the 30s, they developed a game called futsal, which is just a mini version of soccer. It's played on a tiny field, very often on a hard surface, or in a poorer area on any surface you can find. Now, what does the game do to the skill set of soccer? If you're playing on concrete, the soccer ball is going to be moving at an incredibly high speed. If you're playing 5-on-5, like basketball, which it often is, you're going to be touching that ball many, many more times than you would if you were playing a full game of soccer. So what happened haphazardly to these kids who were playing this made-up game is they started to create a skill set based around futsal. The talent code also explored another very important aspect called deep practice, which is the complete opposite of what I described before, thought and action fragmentation. They are enemies of each other. I'm sure some of you here tonight have achieved a level of depth that took deep practice. So what is deep practice? In the book, The Talent Code, he talks about a camp up in upstate New York produced Yo-Yo Ma, Itzhak Perlman, music camp. And if you walk by one of the practice rooms, one of the jokes is, if you can recognize the song being played, they're playing it too fast. So it is slow, deliberate practice. The book had a huge influence on my life growing up as I read the book, because it made me think back to areas where I adapted a skill set as a kid. And as a kid, I was one of those people that was just fascinated by people who did something really well. Coyle actually has a scientific term in the book, HSE, holy shit effect. And the holy shit effect is when you are sitting at a lecture or you are watching a drummer or a comedian or a physician do their thing, and you just say, holy. Now, when I was a kid, I kind of had my own version of futsal. I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, lower middle class family. I loved baseball. And I got pretty good at playing baseball by picking up a rubber ball, which is nothing like a hard ball. The hard ball they use in the major leagues, if you get hit with that thing, it's going to hurt. But a rubber ball that has the seams put in it, just like a regular hard ball, is used to recreate the look, so that if you're a kid and you're throwing this thing against the wall, you feel like you're playing a baseball game. But what happened to me? Very similar to what happened to the kids playing futsal, I began to develop games that I was playing myself. So instead of it being 5-on-5, it's just me. So every time I threw the ball against the steps or against a wall or a tree, it was coming back to me. So I am literally the whole shebang. I'm throwing the ball against the steps. Occasionally it would hit the point of the step. And if you have steps with the stucco in between and you catch the point, that ball is going either straight up in the air or it's coming back at me as a line drive. So guess what's happening to me? I'm pitching the ball like a pitcher, and now I'm catching it like an outfielder. If it hits the stucco, it's going to come back to me as a ground ball, and now I'm a shortstop. If I catch the ball as a shortstop, I throw it against my neighbor, the Halls, and it hits the Halls tree, it comes back to me. If I miss the tree, I have to take a hike and retrieve the ball. You see what's happening? I'm a kid, but I'm in deep practice, and I don't even know it. we went over the book Flow here in great detail. It's everywhere in that process that I'm telling you about, because what am I doing? I am not only accurately hitting the steps as best I can, but when that ball is coming back, I am not playing on a manicured field, artificial turf like glass. No, I'm playing on a street and a sidewalk that has cracks. So when that ball hits one of those cracks, it becomes unpredictable. It's my job to catch that ball. So what's happening to me? When the ball is coming back in an unpredictable, chaotic way, to me, after a while, with the deep practice, repetitive practice, it's not chaotic at all. I almost begin to expect the movement of the rubber ball. It's normal. The same thing happens with a wiffle ball. If you ever play with a wiffle, it's plastic and it has holes designed so that you can throw it and it moves in a very odd way. You play enough with a wiffle ball and guess what happens? It's normal. You can predict the angle and the turn of the ball. When I got onto a baseball field, all of a sudden, I said, wow, the ball that's coming at me is very predictable. The bounce that it's taking almost seems easy to me. I hope this makes sense. I was a kid, 10 or 11 years old. Flash forward, I began taking Taekwondo, late 40s. Very rough time to start, which is something I'm going to hope that comes up in the breakout rooms here. When we start asking each other about our own skill sets, well, what age did you start? And what was it like for you when you first took that step into the unknown? So for me, as somebody in my late 40s, I had a chess, I teach chess for a living, and I had a colleague who was a second dan or a second degree black belt in Taekwondo. And she said to me, come do it. You're into physical fitness and come give it a try. But what happened was the initial first steps were very, very difficult because you are literally stepping out. I have no idea what to expect. So I walk into this dojang and I see all these people on a mat and they're sort of chanting and they're doing these movements in unison. And then eventually they put the dobak on me, which is the uniform, but there's no belt. You don't even get a white belt your first day in the dojang. You know the little hospital gowns that we wear and they have the little strings? That's basically what's holding this thing up. And I'm a grown man, I'm in my late 40s. But then what happens? I want you to picture me stepping onto the mat, 48 years old, really uncomfortable. Now let's go back to that analogy of the buoy in the water, because that's where I am. The buoy says Taekwondo. I'm uncomfortable. And what I want to do, the impression I want to make or question I want to ask is, what makes the diver go down? What makes the diver come back again? And more importantly, what makes the diver stay down? You can't hold your breath. You need to fill yourself up with something in order to continue to search for depth, because it's not easy. The deeper we go in all of these disciplines, obviously it gets more difficult. So that's when you start mixing in words like resilience and grit and perseverance, etc. Without those, you're not going to stay down. You're going to become what's known as a dabbler, which I think is very different than the dilettante. My version, the dilettante to me is somebody who, I like dilettantes. So I think I'm one myself in some aspects, but the dilettante is more somebody who may be into the arts or the sciences, who is always hanging around that one place, but has never really committed themselves to it. The dabbler, which is what I never wanted to be, it bothered me, is the person who gets into the water, swims out to the buoy. It says mathematics, it says Taekwondo, yoga, maybe you want to give a TED talk and it says TED talk, and you swim out there, but you don't stay in the water long enough. If you can get yourself to stay in there long enough, that's when you start to realize you can see underwater and you can see people from other disciplines who are now at the same depth as you. They happen to be doing different things, but they have experienced the same resistance on the way to the new depth. In the dojang, where I was studying Taekwondo, it was built to provide that for you. How? You show up as a white belt. People were very friendly, but it's a hierarchy. The higher belts are in the front. They work back to the white belts. If you stick it out and you come back, you take a very simple test, and now you get your first belt, which is a white belt. So now you have something to work for. But then something interesting happened to me. Now, I'm not a kid, mind you, I'm an adult. I listened. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this introduction, if I know that somebody has a skill set, I'm going to want to hear from them. It turns out the other adults that were there were interested in many different things. And they were able to stay consistent with Taekwondo because of things they were doing in other areas, which blew my mind. And then all of a sudden, I felt at home. And instead of me going for higher and higher and higher belts, I realized that I was soaking things up from many different directions. The master that I studied with was, oh boy, I want to say at least 15 years younger than me. His English was not great. Taekwondo is a Korean art, but his purpose was tremendous. And he had an incredible respect for the Tao Te Ching without ever mentioning it. Everything to Master Na was about balance, which the Tao is just filled with. So by me listening to him, even though he had trouble communicating the ideas, every time I came to study with him, and he gave me a really hard time physically, but I was always aware of the balance that he provided as a teacher. It got so interesting that I would even park my car a half a mile away from the dojang. Why? Because he said to me, it's important that you realize that you don't need to meditate sitting in a lotus position with your eyes closed. He says you should be able to do it while you walk. That's a skill set. That's deep. That does not occur when I'm wearing the no belt or the white belt. That came through conversation with Master Na. He said, park your car half a mile away. Matter of fact, it was free to park there, which was nice. And on the way to the dojang, just think about what you're going to be doing. And guess what? That instantly connected to something. I've been a teacher for over 30 years. It instantly connected like, aha, this is what I've been trying to tell students. Before you apply something, before you go into deep practice, I think there should be a moment of anticipation, a certain period that you are anticipating or pre-planning for what's coming during your lesson. So if it happens to be Taekwondo, if you get your mindset 20 minutes or 15 minutes, however long it took me to walk from my car into the dojang, my mindset, once I step onto the mat, is ready for what? Taekwondo. He also taught me, when you're done with the lesson, if you're meditating at night, you don't have to sit there and clear your mind. You can actually go back and think about what you accomplished on the mat. It helped me a great deal as a teacher, that interaction with Master Na, because young people especially, I don't know how, I'm sure there are people here with kids and grandkids, their schedules today are incredibly busy. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The scheduling is such that if the kid is coming to me for a piano lesson, the question always is, where did the kid just come from? If the kid just came from the soccer field and they're having a snack really quick in the car, where is their mind when they come to me for that piano lesson? When the piano lesson is over, or actually, how about during the piano lesson? Where is the focus? As I mentioned earlier, the thought and action fragmentation we discussed here. So if the kid is coming from say, a soccer game that was heated and intense, and they're eating their lunch 5 minutes in the car, and then they sit down at the piano. Their hands are probably greasy. Somebody just dropped them off. Maybe they forgot their sheet music in the car. Where is the student? In my opinion, it's very hard to create depth because the mind is not in deep practice. If I teach that student something on the piano and they get back in the car and they have to rush home for another activity, what's happening in that loop? Where is that information getting glued to that kid? And I think adults as well. So that was really the beginning of my presentation today. I've got just a couple of more things to add. I'm, as I mentioned, always interested in how you got there. Because I have a student this Friday who is an adult who's playing chess for the first time. And I am always fascinated by how even adults, highly accomplished man, when he sits down to play chess with me, we've had, a couple of introductory lessons, he is completely out of sorts. So what creates that? I've always been fascinated with how can you have so much depth here and then you're trying something new? What causes that initial concern? When you swim out to that new buoy and you look down in the water and you see people who have accomplished things, your first reaction should not be, oh my God, look how good they are. Oh, I'll never get there. No, I don't think it's the case. I think if you surround yourself with people, as I did in the dojang, because these higher belts, it was actually demanded of them to help the lower belts out. But if you surround yourself with people, as we've done tonight, who have the interest first of creating depth, you kind of will hear from each other the things that bother you. And when you do, when you let that out, you're going to get some feedback that very often is going to work. Now, can you get that feedback from some of the books that I mentioned? Of course you can. Can you get professional help or a coach? Of course you can. But if you find that you surround yourself with the people who have that same interest, I want to create depth for myself. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't cause me angst. My initial feeling is you're going to go a lot further than you think. Before we head off to the breakout rooms, I want to just pose a couple of simple questions. Shrikant, you might add some others to take into the breakout room. The question is, think about before you get in there. If I asked you, or if the group asked you, where is your depth? Where is it the most? Is it in your professional life? Have you done it recreationally? Have you picked up the guitar? Maybe you're a dentist and you decided to play the guitar. If you picked up the guitar, where did the depth come? How deep is it? What do you know about the guitar? Have you done stand-up comedy? Have you done something outside of your profession? Or talk about your profession. How did you acquire that skill set? If I'm in the breakout room, I'll chew your ear off, or I'll just ask you to keep on talking. It's just the way I'm built. But when you get in there, come back with 52 Living Ideas version of how to create depth.
Thank you, Mike. There are lots of new people here, so folks, I want to put the questions in slightly different way. I'm thinking about this in terms of, how do you get good at something? That's just another way of phrasing the depth, but how do you really acquire skill at something? That would be another way of thinking about the same thing. How do you really get good at something? The second thing is the format of the breakout rooms. We're going to run this breakout rooms for about 25 minutes. We have got rules in the breakout rooms and in our meetups that allow for really great engagement. The first rule is that it's going to be, the breakout rooms are going to be facilitated by Evanique, Joe, and Mike. So they're going to basically make sure that the rules are kept. The first rule is keep on topic. The second rule is be brief, because there are lots of people who have got lots of interesting things to say to you, and you want to hear them. And third rule is speak your mind. Disagree with anybody on anything, but do so courteously. All right. And then actually the 0th rule, or the first rule, is raise your hand, but that within the breakout rooms, the facilitators will handle that to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. When you come back, keep track of the best questions you have on this topic of gaining depth, of gaining skill, getting very good at something, what is involved in that. Any question that you have, bring the best questions back. When you come back, we will go ahead, everybody puts their questions on the table. I'll organize all the questions, and then we will take them one by one, and everybody gets to answer them. Anybody who wants gets to answer them. That is the format. Let's start the breakout rooms. They will last for about 25 minutes, and then you will come back automatically here for the lightning round of Q&A, starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. All right. Wonderful. So it's time for lightning round of Q&A. The format is very simple. We are first going to just put questions on the table. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Try to put your best question on the table. Be very short. I want to get as many questions on the table as possible. Once we've done that, I'm going to organize all the questions, see the patterns in questions, and then we will take them one by one. So everybody gets to answer all the questions. And as we go on, we're going to do it in rounds. We are doing very well on time. It is 10 o'clock. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to put a question on the table. We're going to start with Cheng. Cheng, go ahead. Cheng, there is a problem with your sound. Your sound is not working. Okay, next up is going to be Evanique.
So first of all, thank you, Mike. My question is, when you were talking about when you were hitting the ball in and out, right? You were talking about that flow, and you said something about lowers chaos, or it wasn't as chaotic. So my question is, do you think that deep practice, or the question for the group is, do you think that deep practice helps you manage the chaos?
Wonderful. Managing chaos.
Yeah. So my question is, I read the book Deep Practice. It makes a lot of sense. But my question is, do you think it really applies for kids? Because I saw it personal experience. Kids really don't understand the methodology. They need their passion or interest. Instead of using this focus on skills to burn out quickly, so they lost the whole interest, then they can't really get deeper at all. It seems just like reading or writing, even they write wrong word, they encourage to keep writing, doesn't matter to correct the grammarly all the time. So I think this practice may not even work for the kids, at least to my experience.
Wonderful. So I'll put it as, does deep practice work for kids? Next up is going to be Kai, Judy, and Mike. Kai.
I was curious people's opinions on what they think the role of boredom is, whether it is a positive or a negative force for developing depth of skill.
Wonderful. What is the role of boredom? Excellent. Next up is Judy. Judy.
What happens when your passion goes on a hiatus? How to rekindle that long life passion that you have for a specific skill that you've had since a kid?
Wonderful. How do you rekindle your passion? Excellent. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand to put your questions on the table. Next up is Mike, Hugo, and Omar. Mike.
Yeah, my question is, has anyone experienced the flow phenomena of losing time, doing something and losing time? The time just goes and you don't know where it went.
Wonderful. Losing time or flow or losing time. Very good. Next up is going to be Hugo, followed by Omar. Hugo.
Thank you, Shrikant, and thanks for Mike for this incredible presentation. It's a great topic. My question is about distraction and like how to optimize learning in this day and age distraction era.
Wonderful. How do you handle distractions? Thank you. Next up is Omar, Jeff, and Joe. Omar.
Yes. How do you manage, especially as we grow older, the overload when we're so interested in so many different things?
Can you repeat? I just want to make sure I got it.
Yeah, I want to say, well, there is going to be a certain overload at some point because, we have to learn techniques of like curbing our curiosity at some point or another, especially as we progress in age. So what are the best ways to handle that?
Excellent question. How do you handle information overload? Next up is Jeff, Joe, Laura, and Andre. Jeff.
So I want to give credit to DLJ for this question that he asked me in the breakout, slightly different wording, but is there anything in the way, especially a younger person, defines who they are? Anything about how they think of their identity that supports a mindset that would be oriented to mastering something?
Wonderful. Identity of mastering things. Wonderful. Excellent. Next up is Joe, Laura, and Andre. Joe.
How do you determine if you hit a point of diminishing returns?
Wonderful. Excellent. Diminishing returns. These are just fantastic questions. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Andre. Laura.
Can you use a template that can take you to the deepest level that maybe you started at the least amount of information you began with that model and went to the deepest? So for example, Polio's problems, 4-step problem solving model. Could you use that to take you through every depth you need?
Wonderful. Is there a template that we can use across the board in multiple areas? Excellent. Next up is going to be Andre, followed by Fred. Andre.
All right, my question, it might be long, but so how do you handle a situation where to learn a more advanced skill or progress on your skill, and to make that progress requires you to put skin in the game? And what I mean by that is requires you to risk more than you're willing. So for example, going into depth, right? Depth. So for example, to learn the next version of the skill, you have to invest 100K. How do you kind of take that step, almost like in faith?
Beautiful.
To learn that skill.
Excellent. Great question. Next up is Fred, followed by Mike. Fred. Fred, you need to unmute. Okay.
I got it. Yeah. My question to Mike is, how does the process of acquiring depth change between one who has to acquire the depth, like a pilot, a surgeon, or a soldier, versus someone who wants to learn how to play the guitar or chess?
Wonderful. Excellent, excellent question. And all these questions are for everybody. So we will have all the answers from everybody. Next up is Mike. Mike S. What's your question?
This it goes back to the OODA loop story. How do you, we had a good exposition on how to develop talent, but how do you develop a cohesive team talent, like the team that was put together by Steve Jobs?
Wonderful, excellent question.
Paul Allen and Microsoft.
Excellent. How do we do mastery at the team level? Okay, so now folks, just look at the amazing questions that we have on the table. Okay, I'm going to rattle them off, and then we'll figure out some way. I will have to, I'm organizing this as we go along. I'm just going to rattle everything off, and then we will start seeing patterns in them. What's the relationship? What's the role of managing chaos while developing depth? Is this approach, does this work for kids? What's the role of boredom? How do you rekindle passion when it is lost? Is there an experience of flow or losing time in the process of doing this? How do you handle distractions? How do you handle information overload? Is there an identity of either mastering versus not mastering that is at the root? Is there diminishing returns? Is there a template that we can use? What happens when you have significant skin in the game? How do we develop depth in that situation? What is the difference between developing depth when you have to do that in order to actually do something like fly a plane, and when it is optional, like playing a guitar? And how does this apply to teams? Okay, so this is amazing, amazing range of questions. Let me see. I want to start with something which is the most, generally what we do is that we start with the deepest, the most general questions. Okay, so let us start with identity here. Okay. There are some people who actually commit themselves to mastering things, and there are many people who don't. What is the role of how you think of yourself that shapes whether you master something or not? It could be identity itself, or it could be identity related to something, like say, oh, people say, oh, I just can't dance, or oh, I just can't do this. So what is the role of self-identity in developing of masteries? So folks, this is a lightning round. We have lots of really fascinating questions. I want everybody to be able to answer all of them. The only way to do that is to keep your answers short. So keep your answers to between one sentence to at most one sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, 4 sentences, pushing it 5 sentences, absolute tops. So try to formulate it in a concise way as best as you can. But please do and try to answer as many questions as you can. We're going to start with Kai. Let me see, Kai, Joe, and Andre. Kai.
I think you need to start with an assumption that mastery is possible for you. For me, the best definition that I got was from my father, who explained to me that an expert is a term that describes a person in a foreign country with a briefcase.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kai. Next up is Joe, followed by Andre. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to believe that the outcome is possible. That I agree with that as well. But one thing that kept coming up is there's a certain degree of perseverance that has to exist within the individual. And I think that really comes from somebody that hates failure more than they appreciate success. That they really cannot stand to lose, or to come up short. And I think you have to redefine what failure means in each particular circumstance. But I think that's really it. Somebody that really refuses to fail.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is Andre, followed by Neil. Andre.
Well, I answered the question with another question, which is, are you willing to potentially dedicate your whole life to mastery, even when the outcome is uncertain? I think that's the mindset you have to have.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Andre. Great point. Next up is Neil, followed by Maritza. Neil.
Yeah. So I would say that, in everything that I can think of that I really mastered, you have to have a sense of self that it's not that you don't care what other people think. It's that you don't let other people's opinions impact what you're doing. You're going to start off, you're not going to do well. You're going to play the guitar, you're going to play badly. That's okay. Don't get intimidated or don't worry, oh, what do they think of me? They're going to think I'm lousy. No, it's have a good sense of self. Your sense of self will carry you through till you get to a point of mastery. So be confident in yourself.
Beautifully put. Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Next up is Maritza.
Shrikant, I think a little bit of self-delusion is necessary. Don't aim for mastery. Aim for continued growth and continued improvement. And just don't realize how far you are from mastery. I think that the best path towards mastery is to not aim for it at all. Just keep improving, keep moving forward. And if you don't ever stop, you might turn around and find one day that folks are looking to you to learn how to do something.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marissa. That's great. What I want to do is I want to take Laura's question about template and twist it slightly to make it easier to handle, that anybody can answer it. If somebody wants to achieve mastery and you wanted to give one suggestion to them, what would that one suggestion be? What do you think is the key? How about I can allow you up to 3 things that you can recommend. If you can do 1, that is best. If you can do 2, it's manageable. 3 is also okay. So it's 1, 2, 3. You can choose how, So we're going to start with Omar, Evanik, and Maritza. Omar, what would you recommend to people?
In a nutshell, don't forget your curiosity that started the whole thing.
Beautiful.
Because that is when you start, again, slowly getting into that. Actually, just as Maritza mentioned, take it easy, right? But to keep doing that is just to keep remembering, you're curious, right? That's how we started to think, not suddenly that, oh, I have to achieve this, otherwise I'm
Wonderful.
I'm a failure. Just
be curious. Wonderful.
Be curious.
Next
because you are already, otherwise you wouldn't be in this situation.
Wonderful. Next up. So we got be curious. Evanik, what do you say?
I say don't be afraid to fail and don't be afraid to be embarrassed.
Wonderful.
That's
wonderful. Excellent. Next up is Maritza, Joe, Mike A, Andre, and Jeff. Maritza, what do you say?
Keep going. Don't stop.
Wonderful. Persistence. Excellent. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, what do you say?
Have a set of principles that'll get you through, that you can fall back on so that you know.
Excellent. Excellent. Next up is Mike A, Andre, and Jeff. Mike A.
Learn like a child. Do not lose your sense of play.
Wonderful. Play. Next up is Andre, followed by Jeff. Andre, what do you say?
Okay, I have 3 things. First, no 0 days, do something every day. Practice in a variety of ways. And the last one, be afraid to fail, so you take it seriously.
Wonderful. Next up is Jeff.
So I want to affirm what Mike Amori said. I think that fun is underrated. That
Wonderful. Have fun.
It's a huge attraction. And then second, the very simple and well-known exercise of signing your name with your dominant hand and signing your name with your non-dominant hand And everyone knows that there was a time in our lives where we could not sign our name with our dominant hand.
Thank
so
you.
It's possible to learn it with your non-dominant hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. All right. This is a fantastic start. Okay, now, where do we go from here? Let's see. We have got managing chaos. We've got kids. Kids is a very special case. So I want to keep that aside for now. Teams, we will handle. Kids and teams, we're going to handle towards the end. Let's see. We got skin in the game, diminishing returns, overload, distraction. How about managing? Both kind of overload and distraction, diminishing returns, all of them have to do with managing this process of acquiring mastery. So how do you manage it? How do you make sure that you're making progress? You're not getting bogged down with diminishing returns. You're not distracted by anything, and you're not overloaded. So those three things you can answer it. How do you manage this process of acquiring mastery without all these? Go ahead, Laura. You need to unmute. Go ahead.
And more of the pot. Learn to evaluate your work and don't be afraid of criticism.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Fred, did you have something?
Well, Oscar Wilde said, life is too important to be taken seriously. I think that if we make it fun, it stays fun.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Fred. What do you guys think? How do you manage this process of acquiring? Because it's not a static process. It's highly dynamic. If you don't watch out, you run into all kinds of dry, it's like flat things. So what is the pattern of doing that? Joe, Marissa, Andre, and Neil. Joe.
So I think with the diminishing returns, and I've kind of thought I'd really be interested if people have any other answers to this, is to understand that better is the enemy of good. Sometimes, so that if you really kind of take that into account, that sometimes we don't necessarily know when to quit, and I think that can actually lead to burnout. The other is, how do you manage this process? I think you have to have a growth mindset and an open mindset, which means you got to change your orientation in this process continuously, like an OODA loop.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you really have to incorporate feedback properly. So you have to have principles and mechanisms to do that. So those are my two answers.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Marissa, Andre, and Neil. Marissa.
I think you treat it as you would an exercise routine. If you want to exercise 7 days a week and you never take a break and you're always doing weightlifting, you are actually not going to get as much benefit as if you exercise 4 days a week and give yourself rest period, because your muscles need to recover and to rest. I think that when learning something, it's the same concept. If we switch our perspectives, if we diversify the method in which we're approaching the learning, then we allow ourselves to be removed from burnout. I don't actually think, Shrikant, that there should exist something as the law of diminishing returns if one is learning. If one is experiencing a diminished return, I think it's just a matter of shifting and learning from a different angle or a different perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. Next up is Andre, followed by Neil. Andre.
All right. So on the overwhelmed issue, I think you have to segment the skill. You have to break it down into smaller pieces. Master running 1 mile before you run marathon. On diminishing returns, you have to practice repetition without repetition. What I mean by that is you have to approach the skill from different angle, run forward, backwards, sideways while skipping.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great point. Next up is Neil.
Yeah, so now this is not something I've practiced myself, but as an engineer, I tend to make things work. So a schedule is probably one of the most effective things. If you're really serious about a skill, plan a schedule. How many hours a day are you going to do it, or how many days a week are you going to do it? Put it on your Outlook calendar, your Google Calendar, and then for each session, if you're going to be 3 hours practicing guitar, what do you want to accomplish? And can you push yourself a little bit? Set a goal for that session of what you're going to make. Small goals. If you can't do big ones, do small ones. I want this piece of music. I want to get all the way through it to the end at least once, kind of thing. And if you do that, you will make progress, and you'll be able to see your progress in looking at your calendar of what you've been able to accomplish. That's probably very effective. It's very, I don't want to use the word anal, but it's really effective. My daughter is a calendar keeper. I'm more the power to her. I am not. And she is tremendous at learning things that way.
Neil, I'm a very big fan of that. So that's why I do at least one meetup per day, if not two. So and we have done about 750 of those, and that helps. Thank you. Great point. Now, what I realize is stunning. 4 of the questions is about the same thing. Okay. And that actually points to a great idea, usually when many different things are pointing to the same thing. Let me first rattle them off, and then I will show you how they are the same thing. First is, how do you manage chaos? Second is, how do you handle boredom? Third is, how do you rekindle your passion? And fourth is, what is the state where you lose a sense of time? All of these are really about flow, because the core idea of flow is that you are operating in a place where you're fully, you have a sense of meaning without boredom and without loss of control or chaos. So you're fully passionate about doing that, and then you experience a change of time. So you can address any of these 4 aspects of it. How do you remain in flow while acquiring mastery? How do you make sure that you're managing chaos? How do you make sure that you're not bored? How do you make sure that you are fully passionate? And how do you make sure that you have this experience of losing the sense of time? I'm going to let Marissa go first. Marissa, DLJ, and Ebony. Marissa.
So, I'm half tempted to throw up on the screen a graph. So I'd like to remind folks of the skills versus challenges.
Marissa, please take your time to answer it. Just to give you, Marissa has done a full set of, Marissa and Joya went through this entire book on flow. She has done many, many meetups on that. And she's doing a series of meetups on evolving self every other week, every other Thursday at 7 p.m. And this is only on 52 Living Ideas, okay? So if you're coming from Greater Philadelphia Society, please join 52 Living Ideas to find out about this. Go ahead. Please take your time to talk about the concept of flow and address the chaos, boredom, passion, and loss of time.
Okay, so there's a graph where we talk about the sweet spot for flow. And we call the sweet spot the flow channel. And I call it the meaningful path. That's just Marissa terminology, right? And so what it is you've got on one axis, you have your challenges, and on the other, you have your skills. Now, if you are at the low end of both skills and challenges, as you progress forward, you may hit anxiety, frustration, fear of failure if you go too high for challenge without your skills catching up. So if your skills stay low and your challenge goes high, you're going to have this frustration, this anxiety. And conversely, the other is true. If your skills stay low, if your skills go high, but your challenge stays low, you're going to find yourself with the problem of boredom, loss of interest, or too much routine that won't hold your interest. And so that's why we're saying what you want to find is that perfect sweet spot where your skills are high enough and your challenges are high enough that you can enter into the flow state. Now, remember, you don't know you're in the flow state when you're in it. The second you become aware that you're in the flow state, you're no longer in the flow state. So that's a little bit of a paradox, but the flow channel, if we're walking that meaningful path, What it means basically is that you're putting one foot in front of the other, but you're doing so with intent. You're not letting life tumble you along. You are actively inching forward in your skills, inching forward in your challenges. And if you do both in tandem, you find yourself staying within this lane. And so that's what I think of when I hear people wondering, how do we do this? So if the goal is mastery, and I wouldn't, like I said, I don't personally advocate for mastery. I advocate for just continued improvement. Mastery would be a nice byproduct if you're living correctly, is the way I view it, right? So, but if you are constantly moving, what does that mean? It means that you're constantly improving your skill set. You're constantly seeking new challenges. And if you're doing both of those things, you are moving. And the movement is what's going to keep propelling you forward. If your goal is mastery of something, that to me, that's the best way. And it seems so simple, right? But we have so many things that pull us in so many directions that we have to pick up the mantle and with intent, decide to keep moving. You might see all the pretty birds on this side, but if that's the opposite direction, that's not where you want to go, because then you don't find yourself in the right sweet spot, because it's fairly narrow considered in all the distractions we have of the world. It can be narrow. But I think that so long as, and if you find yourself with fear of failure, then that means stop increasing up the ladder of challenge. Hold still for a little bit and start moving this way to increase your skills. If you find yourself bored, go up the ladder again. I will tell you honestly that I don't believe almost anyone who knows me has ever heard me say I'm bored. I hear people say it. I'm constantly baffled. I'm never bored. If I'm doing something that ceases to hold my interest, I just turn around and pick something else up. So, and I think that that's something someone mentioned, I forget who, but somebody mentioned, you want to do this every day, probably a couple people. And the reason being is that you're creating a habit. A habit is beauty because it allows you to kind of develop a reflex of intention. You don't have to think every second about intention and about moving forward, because now you've created the habit that is imbued with your intent. And you're going to do it almost by rote without thinking about it. But if you stop and think about that, you created the habit with intent. So now the habit is allowing you to move forward a little more easily. So I'm also a huge fan of doing things until you have it. Like, I am the whiniest exercise person you will ever meet. I whine every time, but I do exercise 3 to 4 days a week minimum. Always. I can whine all day about doing it, but I'll do it because I do have it scheduled in my calendar. And to me, it's not an option. I want to be healthy as I get older. So I have to exercise regardless of how much I feel or don't feel like it. And I think that addresses the idea of not that you will do things you don't like doing, but if you're working, see, intent doesn't have to be only things that are fun. Because I already decided the ultimate principle for me is health, well, then all the whining and potential momentary hatred I may have for, those burpees and all those other horrible things, that feeling does not trump this principle. The principle is health. And if I believe that's the way to get there, I'm going to willingly and happily in some way do these things, even if the one gut reaction isn't positive immediately.
Wonderful.
So that's where I'm going there, Shrikant. Thank you.
Thanks, Marissa. So folks, I made this exception because we really believe in this cross-pollination of ideas. We do meetups on many, at 52 Living Ideas, we do meetups on many different topics. And I never lose an opportunity of showing off what one topic has to offer to another topic. This is all about comprehensivism, being able to see connections between that. So so that was Marissa, who runs the flow meetups. Next up is going to be DLJ. Now we are back to the short answers, okay? Next up is going to be DLJ, Evanique, Laura, and Fred. DLJ.
Oh, I so wanted to do a long answer. No, not really. Just kidding. I think I need some advice a little bit. I'm going to connect two things, which are flow and distraction. So I could tell by the nods that quite a few of you know what it's like to be in the flow state when you get that time. I'm not sure what to call it, dilation, when your body seems to be going really slowly, but it actually isn't. You're actually working very much in autopilot. And there's like an internal narrator that's kind of watching your own movie. Or, yeah, some of you experienced that, and it's a different time rate or something that's going on. So I guess a few people experience that, right? So here's an example I've suffered from a few times. It's like I'm mid-lecture. I'm in autopilot because I know exactly what I'm going to say. I've said it a million times before. And there's a voice that then sort of goes, yeah, you're doing the same as you did last time. You're just about to forget the next thing you're going to say. And there's this kind of scrabbling thing that goes on inside me. This one, no, don't forget. Like I'm trying to grab the words that I'm just about to forget and then they've gone. Does anybody experience that? And then what do I do about it? Thank you.
Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Evanique. Evanique, what do you think about this flow state and how it relates to managing chaos, boredom, and rekindling passion?
Yeah, I think Marissa took most of what I was going to say, but no, it was great, Marissa. No, but the one thing I wanted to talk about, going back to what Neil said about the calendar, I think the key here is that I learned in a training program that you put things on a calendar because it's in existence in space and in time. So when you put something on your calendar, you create it in the world. So and then I was always taught, if you don't put it on a calendar, it doesn't exist. If you don't give it. And then the second part, really quick, is that you have to keep that commitment to yourself. And I think that's how you enter the flow state, because you just don't appear. It doesn't just appear. It has to start. Like you have to open the book. You have to study the topic. You have to be awkward and weird and learn the new skill, what we're talking about here, before you go in depth. But once you're there and you do it every day, like Marissa said, like you have to do it consistently. And the only way you're going to do that is if you're going to schedule a time and space to do that, and even an alarm to say, it's time to do this, and do it. Unless there's like an absolute emergency, you do it. I think that's key in managing all of those things.
Excellent point. Fully agree. Next up is going to be Laura, Fred, Andre, and Joe. Laura.
I just want to make the point that if school doesn't allow you to do any of these things as part of the learning process, it's amazing. It absolutely works against all of this. And it's shameful that we're still doing it that way. This is the way to learn. And fun, I'll tell you, I decided that fun schools are better than formal schools. I know kids that went to fun schools and they're doing great. Yep. And I just highly recommend fun as part of education. Just want to say that.
Thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Fred, followed by Andre, Morgan, and Joe. Fred.
I'd like to say that I believe that we all have different innate talents, and that the ability to reliably and accurately assess our individual potential is one of the critical things which is germane to all the topics we're discussing tonight.
This is beautiful, Fred. I mean, I'm going to put that as a question next, is how do you objectively evaluate your strengths and weaknesses, and how do you choose what you're going to do based on that? How do you, what's the loop for that? So I'll put that as the immediate next question after this. Great point. Next up is Andre, Morgan, and Joe. Andre.
All right, so I have two things. I guess well, one thing is you have to show up to practice regularly. I guess that's one point. At the same time, you have to confess when you fail to keep that commitment, forgive yourself, and then start over tomorrow, because it's not 100%, let's be honest. Second thing is get yourself a mentor or a buddy to guide you, to shake you up, or to give you directions when you get stuck.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Andre. Next up is Morgan. Morgan, go ahead.
So when I was thinking about managing chaos, I guess I was thinking about, I'm a nurse, so back history of having a lot of chaotic situations. As a new nurse, it was like a lot of patients going in and it was everything, it was so busy. I didn't know how to focus. So I started learning, it sounds weird, before going in, meditating, understanding, and it got into a flow of things where I didn't even realize it. Picking the patient that was the sickest. This is a person I focus on. This is the symptom I have to work with on them and care for them. But after a while, like, those have said, you do hit kind of like a bored phase where you're kind of like, this is it. This is the only, thing that, I'm doing. But I realized it was because I wasn't challenging myself anymore. So I started taking bigger pieces instead of just mainly working as a nurse. I started getting myself involved in research, for public health is my other background. So I kind of like kept building myself, finding ways to reach out instead of kind of, staying leveled, lateral instead of not moving up, but also rekindling passion, because then that caused me to have more love of nursing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. Next up is Joe.
I'm pretty much going to focus mostly on the boredom aspect of it, because I think that there's a hard part that we go through in every endeavor that where we're not necessarily as excited as we once initially were. I think it's bound to happen to a certain degree. So I think that the one thing that we can do is really, and this is, and personally, that when I've been able to do it and not been able to do it, is look at it as a journey and trying to enjoy the journey itself and understanding where your goal is. I think that that's critical, where you're looking at it as a challenge, and that's a form of reframing. And so that you're aligned with your goal and that you're actually moving towards, you're reframing whatever it is that's maybe boring you at that particular moment in time as a challenge. And I think the other part is this way to bring kind of order to chaos. I think that is something that is cured through a routine, and a routine that you have that can basically, where you're getting feedback that you're actually incorporating it, as you get, whenever you're starting something new, and then you're starting to able to measure your progress. So I guess that leads somewhat into the next question. So I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Zheng. Zheng, go ahead.
Yeah, I never feel bored myself, so I don't quite understand why people get bored. I think part of the reason, actually, when I first started working, I changed my job every 2-3 years, so that may be the reason. So and then when I interview, they start to have concerns. Oh, you change your job so frequently, and I told them that's because the company is smaller usually. So I learned everything I can learn in 2-3 years. So if I keep staying there, it's kind of repeat. You don't really learn anything. So I stay longest in my own company, which is 6 years. And the way I like my own business, because it's so diverse. I do all kinds of projects. It never bored. I think that's maybe the reason. I think the flow. I found another interesting thing is I found people are so easily get flow in work than traveling, because they learn the flow. You only get flow when you're kind of get deeper with what you're doing. And it's easy when you're doing your work because you're doing similar things. Then you get deeper with different things. It's kind of, there's a pattern. But when you travel, I found every time you go to a brand new situation, so it's very hard to get flow. It's so kind of interesting. Like people try to tell them they enjoy vacation better. But I found, when I work, I usually forgot time very easily. I working till night, or like I totally forgot about that, and I don't understand the difference between I feel working and gaming. I feel like I'm creating all 3D models like playing games. So I think the only difference between working and entertainment is one you pay money, the other one they pay you money. That's the only difference. It doesn't matter what you do, you may do exactly the same thing. So it's ironic. So that's why I think, how can we get our vacation into flow? Because I take a lot of vacation with my kids' time. So I think the only way to do it is like how we get that. Maybe we need to pay more for people to tour us, organize the tour.
Yeah, Zhang, I think your problem is it's not everybody's problem. I don't think everybody is like that. There are people who are who find it a lot more easier to achieve flow in vacations than work. I know certainly some. So I think all of us are individually different in very ways. So we'll come to that question about kind of individual differences and strengths and weaknesses, and how we engage our work, what we do. Next up is Laura and Mike. Laura.
I think I'm drawing a blank now, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Mike.
Yeah, I think in terms of being bored, I think we all have to watch our exposure to things like social media and reading posts and tweets and responses to things, because you get that little dopamine rush, or you get that little, somebody responds to something that you've tweeted or posted, and boom, next thing you know, you get into this loop, and it's very quick and it's instant, and there's no depth. There's no, so then when you leave whatever site that you're on, and then you begin to read a book that does have depth, your body has just been reacting to that fast, self-gratifying process. And now you're sitting down with a book that normally provides you with stimulation. So I think you have to watch, at least I know I do, you have to watch your exposure to kind of like the candy that's at the surface.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so the next question is the one that Fred started talking about. So let me try to phrase it this way. I think all of us have to know ourselves, our strengths and weaknesses, what our strengths are and what our weaknesses. Each of us has strengths and weaknesses, and many times they are connected at the hip. That doesn't mean that we can't improve on our weaknesses, and that doesn't mean that we should just only do our strengths. But strengths and weaknesses are real. So the question is, how do you choose what you're going to master? How do you manage the kind of strengths and weaknesses in order to make the most of your life? How do we take into account kind of objective evaluation of our own strengths and weaknesses? So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer that question. Go ahead, Laura, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it's important for people to work in groups so that, and they can share and populate, and work on developing their mastery skills by sharing knowledge with others. And that's, I think it's critical not to work alone.
Wonderful. Excellent point. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, I think like how do you choose what you master is you choose what will contribute most to your life. And I think getting feedback is key to knowing your strengths and weaknesses, because I think the key is just to, and I think like Laura said, working in a group and discussing ideas, and you'll see where your strengths and weaknesses lie, and then asking questions. That way you can know, this is where I'm weak in, and this is where I need to study, and this is where I need growth in.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Marissa, Andre, and Cheng. Marissa.
Shrikant, I do think that it's really important for us to do, SWOT analyses on ourselves, right? Check in with yourself and see where your strengths and your weaknesses lie. And, you know, if you have short, stubby, not very flexible fingers, maybe don't buy the full-size guitar. Maybe buy the 3/4 guitar. But ask me how I know. But just a in that vein, it's one of those things where just because something is identified in your self-analysis as a weakness, it doesn't mean that it's something that's a path entirely closed to you. Indulge in a little bit of orneriness. Don't accept no, even from yourself. I don't find it to be time wasted if one is exploring the depth. We're talking about depth here, right? So there's also a depth to your weakness. So how weak is it? Is there room for improvement? Sometimes the answer is there is, but maybe the cost is not what I want to do. If you're seeking for meaning making, right? A good self-assessment will help you determine whether or not this weakness is one you wish to pursue or not. But I don't think weakness is something that we should shy away from. Sometimes the weakness highlighted is just a spotlight on something where you have a massive potential for growth and improvement. So maybe, change the perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. Next up is Andre, Jeng, Mike S, and Joe. Andre.
All right. I think it's important to define what a word weakness means. The definition of weakness for me is something that you are not able to do. And the most reliable method to know your weaknesses is to attempt to do something and not succeed, come up short. I think you should only work on your weaknesses because that's where the growth is.
Thank you. Next up is Jeng, Mike, and Joe. Jeng.
Yeah, actually, I have very different opinion from what Andrew was saying. So I think strength and weakness, they said your strength is your weakness is your strength. I think it's really, there's no strength or weakness. So what I learned is instead of work on your weakness, you should focus on your strengths because you get much more reward for what you're good at. But what you need to is 20-80 rule. Basically, you need to spend 20% of time to get 80% of your weakness covered. So at least you reach the average. Then you spend the rest of the time to focus on your strengths. Use your 80% of time to get the last 20%, become the expert. Then you're the one nobody can replace because you're so good at certain things. People cannot easily replace you. So that's what I think it's how we should, divide it between the.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeng. Next up is Mike, followed by Joe.
I assume this one is Mike S.
Yes, the magical Mike. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Several people have mentioned the importance of having a goal. You also need a criteria for measuring the direction and gradient of how you're approaching that goal. And that plays into flow. It plays into the OODA loop discussion. It also plays into a lot has been learned of how people learn as to how machines learn, and in particularly multiprocessor machines.
Mike, we're talking about weaknesses and strengths.
Well, but the issue is how the commonality to weaknesses and strengths is you need a goal to know how you're approaching that goal, and then you can edit the weaknesses and strengths. A lot has been learned from how machines learn that has gone into, that has come from how humans learn, and now some of that is flowing backwards. There was a discussion where Instead of playing with a hard ball, you play with a wiffle ball, or you play the music very, very slow. That's in machine learning, that's called synthetic annealing, where
Thank
you
you.
solve a much simpler problem
Excellent.
very
Mike,
carefully.
Mike, excellent, all excellent points. But and next up is going to be Joe. And then actually after Joe, I have one more piece where I'm going to bring in a whole series of meetups that we've done on just this topic. Joe.
Yeah, I'm really kind of I'm a little bit lost after the last. I'm just thinking, I'm like my mind's thinking about computers.
Mike,
but,
no question what you did to Joe.
it's no, but I when I think that well, one of the things, how do you know? I really think it's important to have a good friend that's willing to tell you the truth. I always thought, one of the best things about essentially finding your better half or whatever it may be, another significant other, is that that they can be honest with you and they love you for who you are. So I think that really is a grounding, something that can ground you. I think the other part is, journaling is a very important part when you're talking about essentially trying to gain perspective as to where you are. And then I don't think people should run from their weaknesses. I think they should, strive, as Zhang had alluded to achieve some degree of balance. And I think that you also need to determine what is success when you're addressing your weaknesses as well. So I think that those are three areas. In fact, I would say, focus on your weaknesses because it gets you outside your comfort zone.
Wonderful. Jeff, go ahead.
I just have a little thing to offer for Marissa.
All right. Wonderful. All right.
Marissa, I haven't taken that guitar out in 5 years.
Wonderful. All right. So I want to tell you about a whole series of meetups we did on the topic of strengths and weaknesses. Okay. And I generally agree with the idea of 80-20, that you focus on your strengths about 80, and then 20% you have to focus on your weaknesses. So we went through this book called Principles by Ray Dalio, and it has the best capturing of thoughts on weakness that I've ever seen. Okay, he says, look, everybody has weaknesses, and you can do 4 things about the weaknesses. Most people do the first, which is actually ignore your weaknesses. They evade what they are weak at. Okay, and so he says that's always wrong. Okay, but there are 3 other options you have. One is that you can improve. You can try to improve on the weaknesses. Number 2, the third option is to work with people who are strong where you're weak. And the 4th option is to choose to do things where the weakness doesn't hurt you as much. Okay. Now, the question is, what is the hierarchy? I mean, I clearly agree with him on, there's no point evading anything. You have to face where you are. And once you identify that, okay, I'm weak at something, what do? I think the best strategy is to start working with people who are strong there, because it actually helps you do all the other 3. Sometimes you're so weak at something that you can become twice as good, but you would be still 2%. Okay. But if you're interacting with people who are very good, at least it gives you a scale. So that's one. Second is that you can learn from them. We can learn a lot from other people. It just accelerates all your learning. And thirdly, you can choose the percentage of work between you and them on different things so that the net effect is very significant. This goes to the team part. So that was one identification, which I find very, very useful. The other thing that they have is called radical honesty. And this is, relates to a point that Joe was saying about that your friend can give you, if you really care about, if there are people who really care about you, they have your good in mind, and they're honest with you, that's really extremely valuable. So what we did is that at our, I've been running these meetups in person in New York for the past 5 years. So I have really good friends. So what we did was that we were actually looking at one aspect of the cycle that Ray Dalio has. It's a cycle of, setting goals, and, coming up with a plan, doing execution, evaluation. So there is a cycle that he has. And you have to figure out, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to evaluate what are we good at of different parts of the cycle. So what we did was that it was, I think, 5 of us. Each of us evaluated ourselves on a scale of 1 to 4, how strong we were. And then all of us evaluated each other. Now we all knew each other very well, okay? And it was really interesting. And the thing is, everybody knew that everybody, really, cared about, every person. And that's what we're trying to do. So it was really fascinating. You would explain, like, for example, if I thought I was somewhere at 4, somebody would say I was at 2. And then I would say, why do you think so? Or suppose I thought it was 2 and they thought it was 4. I would say, why do you think that? And we would discuss that, okay? And it was extremely useful exercise, because many times you get into, kind of confirmation biases about things. It allows you to, but the most amazing, most interesting and funniest thing was, of all the people, there was this one person whose evaluations of everybody was most different from their own evaluations and everybody else's evaluations. So he just looked at the table of evaluations and says, so I don't know how to evaluate other people at all. So that was what he got from it, which was amazing, actually. So anyway, so that's a little piece on Ray Dalio and measurement of weaknesses and strengths. So let's see here. How are we doing on time? We are close to 11. I'm going to give a chance for Mike A, okay, to talk about anything. Mike, how are we doing, you think?
This is very similar, Shrikant, to what happened last meetup when we talked about the fear of success, which was an impediment, right, to achieving some of the things we talked about tonight. And I have had the great privilege for the second time to sit back and just watch the dialogue and the questions go back and forth. So how are we doing? I'll certainly pay to come back again. Yeah, it's been great. No, it's fantastic. The contributions were amazing tonight.
No, I always like this part. I mean, I think the structure of somebody putting the thought in and putting something on the table that everybody can focus on. So all these minds are just focused on this one set of questions, and then have them come up with their own questions, come up with their own answers. I think it's really, really amazing. And I can tell you that doing these meetups, 750, I think, is a great thing. You keep learning as you go on. And I think this part, the final part, is my favorite part of the meetups, because what it does is that it allows contributions from everybody, both questions and answers, that just, people bring up things where I would not have even thought of, like most people would not have thought of. So it's just fascinating. All right. So folks, let me tell you about what's coming up. On Thursdays, we do, and all of these are, all of the things I'm saying. Oh, there is a non-magical mic. Okay, wonderful. I was wondering where you disappeared, Mike. Okay, you're in non-magical land. All right. So tomorrow on Thursdays, we do meetups on Gospel of John. We are going through Aquinas commentary. So tomorrow we are going to be talking, I think we're doing chapter 10. tomorrow, day after tomorrow, we're doing Bhagavad Gita. And we have a very special presentation. So if you want to attend just one Bhagavad Gita meetup, this is it. Yogeshwar is giving a presentation on what it means. What is the integration between Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga? So Jnana Yoga is about knowledge. Karma Yoga is about action. And Bhakti Yoga is about love. What is the connection? And how do these three relate to each other? And how can you kind of predominantly focus like 60% on one, 20 on the other, 30, 10 on the others? And what does it look like? All these configurations of paths towards, the highest good that you can pursue. We're trying to make the Indian thought accessible to anybody. Yogeshwar is amazing. I mean, he reads Sanskrit. He has read every major commentary in Sanskrit in history on Bhagavad Gita. And that's the place where he stands. He starts from. And we're trying to make everything accessible. So that's very special. On Saturday, we're doing a meetup on Fountainhead. So if you've read Fountainhead, it's going to be the most interesting meetup because I'm going to try to give an overview. I'm going to compare Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, structure of the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, to the Fountainhead as a book. On Sunday, we're doing the meetup on Dao De Jing. Jason and Amon are going to be back at 8 p.m. The Fountainhead meetup is at 2 p.m. On Saturday. And on Sunday at 8 p.m., we are doing a meetup on Dao De Jing. We are going to go through about 20 of the verses that Jason has translated. I have to tell you that on the side, I'm continuing to work on, though I'm not religious, I have found that these meetups on Gospel of John, Dao De Jing, and Bhagavad Gita have been tremendously educational. Because they are all dealing with the core of human nature. All these books deal with it, and they do it in a very different way because the Chinese mind is very different from the Indian mind. Not mind itself, it's the cultures that are different. And being able to bring all of them in and try to see the commonalities and differences is amazing. The part that at this point I'm, not that familiar with culturally is the Bible. So I am actually doing kind of private conversations with people. So this weekend, I'm doing a conversation with my friend Nick, who actually reads the original Greek in which Gospel of John was written. And so we are going to do John 1:1. He typically says that he generally one verse he writes or reads about 14 pages on each verse. So I don't know how far we are going to get in John 1:1, but if we can cover the first three lines, 3 verses, I think that's a lot. There is a lot in there. So, and then I'm also going to be talking to my friend Peter, who reads Latin. So he reads it in Latin, and we're going to do a discussion, just a one-on-one conversation, which I'm going to record and put on. So we're trying to kind of get kind of this holistic approach to different works, just like we're doing in Dao De Jing. At some point, I'll start doing that in Gita as well. So, so that's what is going on. All right. Any comments from anybody? People who are here for the first time, what did you guys think? I want to first ask people who have been here. Omar, what do you think?
Oh, I really enjoyed this. I mean, first of all, I love that format, where we wake up, do groups and come back. And then I just, I'm very impressed. The first time I did join one, but it wasn't like this though. I joined with the Philadelphia Thinking Society before, but not in this format.
No, this is 52 living ideas. So this is the only meeting
Oh,
that
I
we
see.
do along. So please join 52 living ideas.
Okay, I will.
We
I will.
do this. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Andre Batista, what do you think?
I think this is a really nice way to get a lot of knowledge and wisdom from people that really know what are they talking about. And really glad because you having me here, and thank you so much for so much knowledge.
Where are you calling from?
Where are you calling?
Yeah. Where are you right now?
Right now, I am here in Medford because I flew from Colombia like 2 weeks ago.
Okay, wonderful.
And now I'm here in Boston.
Wonderful.
So
Welcome.
I went to the meetup and I saw like this is a very interesting thing. And as I got inside, I got a lot of knowledge. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Now open to anybody who wants to say anything.
I just want to say, great format, great facilitation, keep everybody on track, and really interesting topic. So I had a good time.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Andre. All right, folks. Evanik.
I just want to say thank you to Mike. Great job. The examples were really helpful. So I just wanted to say excellent job. Thanks, Mike.
Mike, I second that. I think your meetups have been just fantastic. And I think this format works very well of you putting some, a topic down and then letting, the really long breakout rooms, like 25-minute breakout rooms where people can actually discuss things in depth. And then my favorite part is the thing at the end where you have all these amazing questions coming and then all the amazing answers, coming from that. Thank you, Mike. Next up is Joe, followed by Mike. Joe.
Yeah, I did want to thank Mike publicly. He knows how I feel, about his meetups in general. I've let him know offline. But I will say in our breakout room, everybody was really engaged, and the facilitator was the problem, and we didn't get through everybody, but nonetheless, we really got some really great stories, and we got a lot out of the people that did share. So anyway,
Wonderful.
so thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Mike, any final thoughts?
I end so many meetups here at 92. Yeah, maybe you can add another 40. 52 living ideas. I sometimes type it and it's time well spent. I'm very cautiously guarding my time these days. I'm very much aware of what I'm doing with it, and I am never bored, and always happy to see all of you here. It was tremendous fun. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
It definitely is a
Bye,
great
everybody.
discussion. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.